Today we're going to talk about a lot of what I think is missed opportunity in terms of where people are in terms of realizing the potential of big data, our perspective on that. And I'll take you through a couple of case studies that we've done at Lucidworks and helping clients sort of realize that next level of potential of their information. My name's Will Hayes. I'm the CEO at Lucidworks. Prior to this, I was part of the founding team of a company called Splunk. Spent a lot of time out here in Germany with you all. In fact, my colleague, who's our EMEA country manager, Christian, is here with us as well, who was a colleague of mine at Splunk. And if you're familiar with Splunk, you know a lot of what we did there was about really unlocking machine data, helping people get better access, gain better insights out of that machine data, making that data more accessible. And after 8.5 years, and we had a very successful run and built a very successful company, I started thinking about sort of, what's that next mile in terms of big data? What are the things that people really aren't achieving? What are maybe some of the missed opportunities at Splunk in terms of architecture, in terms of getting into a broader set of use cases, a broader set of data? And search was a paradigm that I found to be very exciting. It was something that we brought to the log and machine data at Splunk, and it was something that Lucidworks had been doing via an open source project called Apache Solar. And so when I met with the team at Lucidworks, we developed this thesis that said, what's missing today, there's all this infatuation around infrastructure. Everybody's talking about it's going to be Hadoop, it's going to be Storm, it's MapReduce, now it's going to be Spark. But what was really not happening in the industry were applications. And our thesis 2 years ago was that we could develop a platform that would enable organizations to build big data applications, to actually take advantage of all of this information out there. And we developed this platform called Fusion. And it was a great setup, actually. The Cray presentation I really appreciated because he provided a lot more detail in terms of the inner workings of how these things work. I'll probably speak at a much higher level. But the ultimate thesis was that when you think about the experiences that search brings to you, it's not just that ability to do natural language access, which is important. We've never needed an instruction manual, for instance, in terms of how we're going to approach Google, right? That box was pretty intuitive. But it's all of the processing and the compute and what we call signals that go on in the background and the machine learning that gets applied to determine what's relevant inside of that information. And that's what's missing today when you think about these data applications is we have all of this information at our disposal, but we're leveraging a very, very small portion of it. So if you think about it in whole, and a lot of you probably can relate to this, companies are analyzing about 10% of the information that they have at their disposal. So with all of this infrastructure, with all of this investment, we're going in and we're capturing information, we're storing it, we're processing it, we're putting it in Hadoop, we have it in the cloud. We might be subscribing to data services now. We're still not leveraging it all. And that's about 1% of that information actually gets translated into something actionable. So of what we are actually leveraging, what we're trying to make sense of, 1% of that data turns into insights. It turns into action that the organization can actually take advantage of. So how much information is that? If you look at all the data that's being generated, and really, we started out back maybe 10 or 15 years ago with less than 0.0001% of what we have today. And the explosion that's happening, not just from the devices and the machine data that we have, now we have the Internet of Things, so we have all of these different sensors and indicators that are around the globe that are feeding us information. And then there's human-generated information, right? Because our customers are interacting with us on a daily basis, and they're doing it in unstructured ways. And so this explosion of information has led to about 7.5 sextillion gigabytes of information that's available today for us to take advantage of. And so if we think about what's being missed with that 1% being actionable, 10% actually being leveraged, that's a lot of information that organizations simply aren't taking advantage of. And we're not using that to create better insights. We're not using that to make better decisions. And so there's a lot of disillusionment today in terms of big data. We were just having a conversation out there in the quad about how, all this hype came in and really the vendors drove a lot of this, right? They got us really excited about this new infrastructure, new hardware. It was sort of a heyday, if you will, back 5 to 7 years ago in terms of the explosion. Hadoop was a great example of just billions and billions of dollars of market capitalization, over, $3 to $4 billion in investment that was going into these technologies. Yet you talk to customers and they're really not realizing the advantages of here. Nobody's sitting here and saying, wow, that big data initiative that we kicked off 2 or 3 years ago was this rip-roaring success. In fact, I talked to very few customers. In fact, where we live in the Silicon Valley is probably where some of the more cutting-edge big data initiatives are happening. And I see a lot more industries that are trying to chase the success of Netflix, chase the success of Facebook, chase the success of Google with very little success. So if you think about it from a hype standpoint, right, we've kind of reached that hype point, but we haven't reached the value. In fact, if you think about, with big data, entire job categories are coming online, right? The term data scientist, this was something 5 or 6 years ago we barely heard of. Now all of a sudden everybody's in the market for a data scientist. Very few people can actually tell me what is it that a data scientist will do on a day-to-day basis, but they know that it's something that they've got to have. But what it represents is going back to that trough of disillusionment, right? We all ramped up our investments pretty heavily. We all started thinking about all of these outcomes that we could have. We were going to be the Google for financial services, the Facebook for customer insights. But then we hit this point where we said, okay, we need to actually go back and get resources to make this a possibility because frankly, the skill sets didn't exist. And the technologies which were stuck up in the infrastructure weren't delivering the insights, weren't delivering the applications. And so when I think about the Gartner hype cycle, today, again, we're in this, what they consider the trough of disillusionment. And that's pretty clear to me that it's this infatuation with infrastructure rather than output, right? Getting folks to better applications, getting folks to better insights. So we'll talk a little bit about the things that you can do in your organization to take advantage of this data at your disposal and start applying these towards applications, applying these towards better user experiences. Enable folks within your organization to take advantage of the information that you have at your disposal. And search, as that paradigm, requires very little specialized expertise. Like I said, anybody that you can put natural language access in front of information can make use of that information. We talked earlier in the previous talk, again, talking about the machine learning aspects, and these are really powerful concepts, but again, require very skilled individuals. So our belief is by delivering technology that's purpose-built to help you take advantage of all of those signals, of all that information at your disposal, is what's going to get us out of this trough of disillusionment, move us from infrastructure to insights. So this term dark data gets floated around a lot. And again, I think this is another one of those terms that people misinterpret. Dark data is all of that information that we don't have access, that we don't leverage today. Most of it comes in the form of unstructured content. This is information that's being shared with us via reviews, via social media, via patterns that exist in buying behaviors, customer satisfaction, customer relationship databases that we're simply not taking advantage of. The way that we can start to unlock that data is to start to apply an access paradigm over the top of it. Let's make this data accessible. Let's take the subject matter expert, put them in front of an interface where they can actually start to extract meaning from this. Now, that's just the first input. The second input has to be that we're taking advantage of the signals that are there. So if I think about things like customer reviews, customers are sharing more and more information with us than ever before. We have to process that information. There's machine learning algorithms out there that we can purchase off the shelf. We don't have to necessarily go out and acquire a bunch of new talent, find those mythical data scientists that are in such high demand today. We're just simply looking for insights about people's happiness. Right? We want to classify this information, quantify whether it's a negative or positive experience, and then continue to use that information to produce better results. Help me understand what the sentiment is around a particular product or around a particular service. Starting to locate different geography pockets in which those sentiments start to occur so we can take advantage of those trends and tie those back into our decision making. And again, this is the gap today that we're not taking advantage of. And to think that people back here in the industry are going to have to go back and solve these problems for themselves. These are very difficult problems. And so we feel that it's time for the vendors to evolve and to go beyond just kind of selling you the infrastructure, pushing more and more down your throat that you can't take advantage of, and starting to deliver this value in the form of applications, in the form of intelligent platforms, helping us build better data-driven applications. So in the world of dark data, we see a number of use cases. In the financial services, things like fraud detection, where we're looking at different transactions, we're looking at different behaviors. We work with a bank today who's looking at all of the interactivity between all of their traders, and they're identifying areas where traders are communicating in fashions that they shouldn't be. This is a combination of machine learning algorithms that are running through Spark that are looking for these patterns, the graph databases that were talked about earlier, the text analytics. If I'm a trader who's doing a deal with a particular client, and that client happens to be the underwriter of another organization, I should have no communication patterns going on with those organizations. These are the types of things that we can start to identify when we take advantage of things like emails, messages, other transactions, document data, trade data, all of those things that we have at our disposal today. In this particular client's case, there was a $5 billion a year in fines that they are facing for not catching these transactions. In governments, working around traffic patterns, working around weather patterns, understanding energy consumption as a result of these things. Again, slight tweaks, slight optimizations here can realize savings in tens of billions of dollars. And so these aren't just science experiments for the sake of science experiments. We don't just go out and invest in all this infrastructure because we think it's fun or our internal resources are begging for the latest and greatest technology. We actually have intentions with these. And again, we're just simply not realizing those potentials. So as we introduce the search paradigm, not only do we take advantage of the access problem, we can start to put more people in front of this information. We start to enable those subject matter experts. But we start to take advantage of what goes on behind the scenes. We typically think about search as being that little box on top of a web page where I can come in here and I can type something in. Next level might be that I can ask a question. But search is really about identifying what's important inside of my data, applying the machine learning, applying advanced analytics in the background to surface the most actionable information. And we experience this every day in the form of e-commerce, right? If I think about something like an Amazon.com or in Deutschland, Zalando, right? Where somehow they're curating this perfect experience. They're surfacing actionable information to us on a daily basis. It's coming through the forms of emails. It's coming through the forms of social media campaigns. We're seeing it as soon as we log into a web page where that entire homepage caters to your needs and to your wants, to where you can fill a shopping cart without having to actually navigate away or even type anything into that mythical box. And so this sort of Amazonification, if you will, of enterprise applications is the next step that we need to start to apply. And what we found with our thesis at Lucidworks is by enabling organizations to take advantage of these signals, to leverage that search paradigm, that idea of surfacing actionable, important information, we can start to apply it to a variety of use cases. This is optimizing customer experiences. This is identifying churn before it happens. This is finding more useful information for researchers and knowledge workers in order to optimize their time and their experiences. So let's look at some of these examples here in a little more detail. Again, we're going to keep this a little higher level than the last talk, so hopefully you understand the inner workings after seeing the details around graph and machine learning. Happy to talk about that in a lot more detail offline. But where does search kind of come in and intersect here? So the ability to take all of that multi-structured data, again, the human-generated content, which makes up the bulk of dark data, because we know how to deal with rows and columns. We know how to deal with metrics and databases and relationships that are coming our way. We've been doing this for decades. In fact, the idea of big data is kind of funny to me, because when I look at what organizations are actually trying to attempt, this is the data warehouse of 10, 20 years ago. We're just dealing with more power in terms of the infrastructure that we can take advantage of, advanced platforms that can do a lot more across commoditized hardware. But more importantly, we're just dealing in more information, multi-structured information. And so that search engine's ability to take and normalize data from all of your human-generated content alongside all of your structured content provides a single point of access across everything that you have at your disposal. The immediacy. I can't stress enough how important that user experience, that ability to retrieve things in near real time, the results that you expect. If I go out to Google, if I go out to my favorite shopping site, enter in a term, I'm not expecting to run a SQL query and come back 5, 10, an hour later, right? These are things that we expect to be happening in sub-second responses. And the good news is we have technology today where we can actually achieve those kinds of results. Scalability. You know, in our financial services customers today, they're looking at, in some cases, billions of transactions that are being leveraged, which requires the infrastructure's ability to scale across these billions of transactions, across multi-structured data stores, and still provide that immediate sub-second response. And then kind of a new concept is this idea of search-driven analytics. Now, this is the ability to use search as an entry point to perform what we call agile or ad hoc business intelligence. A lot of vendors like ourselves, you might hear these stories of, oh, the RDBMS, the relational database is dead, the data warehouse is dead. Well, the reality is these things aren't going anywhere. But there's a new paradigm that's existing of, I need to ask questions, I need to find answers to questions that I don't know at the time that I load the data. So in your relational database world, we would structure these relationships specifically to the questions that we had. And these were important questions that were helping us optimize the business. But in this new world, these questions are ever evolving. And so this concept of search-driven analytics starts to take advantage of that flexibility. Now, the signal data that we talked about earlier, this is where that context comes in. These are all of the signals that exist in the form of data inputs that help us determine what's meaningful inside of that information. E-commerce does this all the time. They're looking at your behavior. They're crowdsourcing that behavior. People who like this, they also like these items over here. So we're taking advantage of those inputs that are coming from the user that are helping us determine that path to the most important or the most relevant information. The content itself, as we start to provide more advanced computational efforts on top of that content, the natural language processing, machine learning, internationalization across content, where we can start to link behavior between different geographies over cultural barriers, over geographic barriers. So these different inputs are what we call signals that we start to process and we start to leverage at the time of retrieval to provide that richer experience. So how does this work in the dark data world? Well, let's take a look at this in terms of the search-driven analytics piece. Again, with the multi-structured approach to data, we can ingest data from anywhere. We can index all your human-generated content. We can take things from websites. We might be subscribing to different proprietary feeds of information, whether we're in financial services or consumer services, government, as policies and other information are being fed to us in real time or near real time. And then, of course, everything that we're seeing from that user activity, right? This is the log data that's being generated with every transaction, which is really the record of proof in terms of where somebody's going within a system and how they're leveraging it. So how does this turn into analytics when we're dealing with so many multi-structured data types? Well, that natural interface, the ability to type in a keyword, to type in a variety of keywords and join them through Boolean and ands and ors, allows us to retrieve a data set from this multi-structured collection. Well, in that data set, the metadata is represented as rows and columns. So now we're back to the traditional paradigm for analytics. So the ability to come in and structure that natural query, retrieve this big wob of data that intersects all different types of information that we have at our disposal, and then normalize the metadata to represent rows and columns, means that we can start to drive analytics just like we would in our relational database or within our data warehouse. So this is really unlocking that information in a way that wasn't possible. And if you're running a data warehouse today, I can almost guarantee that there's a subset of information that's missing, which is most likely the unstructured data, because that is some of the hardest stuff for an organization to go out, parse, collect, and maintain. And so search with the search-driven analytic approach can really bridge that gap. And again, the beauty of this is that you don't have to foresee those questions up front. You don't have to sit and spend months, if not years in some cases, working with analysts, understanding the queries, understanding the problems that they're trying to solve. We want to enable those folks to work more efficiently. So providing them this sort of agile BI capability allows anybody to really become a mythical data scientist in a way, but more importantly, it allows your organization to leverage more of that dark data that you're not taking advantage of today. So to put this in something a little more specific, let's take a customer insights example. And again, really kind of simple, high-level examples, but this is something I think we can all relate to. Our customers are interacting with us in ways that we've never seen before. They're quite vocal. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we can start to leverage this information. And a simple example is aggregating things from reviews as people are giving you feedback, social media as it's happening out there in the ether, your customer database, which contains a wealth of content and information about buying patterns, about services and subscriptions, and then of course the support tickets, which can start to give you a sense of customer satisfaction. Aggregating that information, providing the search access to that gives you a single point of access where you can come in and you can triangulate or you can create a picture on any given point, whether it's through a product, a service, or an individual. The same thing applies to fraud. We take the exact same technical approach. I talked about this a little bit in detail earlier, but looking at transactional information, user information, the text classification that we can apply to messages, to emails, to anything that we have at our disposal, which may contain something that represents a fraudulent behavior. And so that's a very important part of that classification and the natural language processing of it all. And then, of course, the different geographies, because policies dictate different behavior in different parts of the world. So aggregating that information throughout the infrastructure, providing that single point of access, we can start to provide instant access to fraudulent behavior. We can identify when something may be suspicious, and I always encourage organizations to separate suspicious from malicious, because just because something may appear one way, we don't want our algorithms working in the background and suddenly determining when certain transactions can occur, or more importantly, when certain people are going to be expelled from the organization. So it's important that we're surfacing things that we think may need to have that human review component. And then just a quick look at infrastructure. Again, at Lucidworks, we provide a solution that combines these technologies here to make this simple for organizations. We have purpose-built algorithms for doing the machine learning, for doing the classification, to help you make these decisions faster, and to ultimately help you realize the potential or the power of big data. A very simple infrastructure here, and we saw a much more detailed view earlier, but our data acquisition framework, which can live in a variety of ways depending on where your data lives. Again, we have tools for this that we provide off the shelf. Hadoop is sort of transformed. It used to be a compute engine, but with the batch sort of nature of it all, we're seeing more and more of what was happening in MapReduce shifting to Spark. So Hadoop has been used a lot more for a more commoditized storage layer. There are some kind of batch processing compute that can happen, but Spark is playing a major role now in terms of the real-time aggregations and advanced analytics and machine learning that are getting applied to all of that signal data. We rely on Solar as an access point, so we can aggregate everything through a single point of access, enabling users to come in, do their key value queries, as well as their natural language queries across data that's coming through all this infrastructure. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's important that we're leveraging the appropriate technology in the appropriate place. But more important, just want to encourage you to start thinking about your initiatives, not your infrastructure. Don't let these vendors confuse you that you've got to be invested in the latest X, Y, or Z. We should really be thinking about what we want to achieve as an organization and pushing the vendor to move you towards solutions, not just buying more technology. So with that, I'll let everybody get to lunch. Danke schön.